Under the blazing skies of the frontier, where the wind carried dust and destiny alike, there lived a story that was never written down until now. It begins in the wild ridges of the red hills of Sonora, where love and fear, mercy and survival all walked side by side. The morning sun had barely touched the peaks when Clara Wynter rode out from camp. Her worn sketchbook was tied behind the saddle, a straw hat hanging loose against the breeze. The Arizona Territory still lay half asleep under a golden hush. Every rock, every thread of sagebrush shimmered in soft sunlight. Down below, the San Pedro River whispered like a silver vein through the earth. Her father's crew, rough men with rifles, boots, and whiskey on their breath, were still sprawled near the dying fire, dreaming of pay and progress. They had been charting the canyon for the Southern Pacific Line, carving a trail of iron through unforgiving country. But Clara had grown restless watching them bicker and curse the dust. She longed for silence, for color, for the quiet pulse of the desert at sunrise. Not the screech of metal tools or talk of profit. She guided her bay mare down a dry ravine, seeking a place where the first light painted the red cliffs in that shade she loved, rust and gold like memory. The horse's hooves stirred up the scent of sage and sun-baked dirt. Overhead, a hawk traced lazy circles in the wide blue. For a heartbeat, Clara forgot the danger of being alone in Apache country. Then came the sound. A sharp hiss, dry, deadly. The rattler struck before she even saw it. Bronze scales flashed near a pale rock, then pain, white-hot, ripped through her calf. Her cry shattered the stillness. The mare reared, panicked, and bolted. Clara stumbled, clutching her leg as blood darkened her stocking. The world began to spin. She tried to tear her scarf for a bandage, but her hands had lost their strength. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. The sky wheeled in copper and blue before fading to haze. She fell against a juniper trunk, gasping, and saw a blur in the shimmering heat. A man dark against the sunlight, moving closer. At first she thought she was dreaming. Then he knelt beside her. His skin carried the color of the earth, his hair black as obsidian tied back with a leather cord. His eyes, steady, unreadable, met hers only for a breath before turning to her wound. "Rattler," he asked, voice low and rough, from years of wind and silence. Clara managed a faint nod. Without a word, he drew a flint knife, sliced the hem of her skirt, pressed his lips to the wound, and spat the poison away. She barely felt the sting of pain, only his touch, firm and sure, and the wild scent of sage and smoke that clung to him. Her vision blurred again. The last thing she felt was his arms lifting her strong and steady, carrying her through the canyon. The desert tilted and faded to black. When she woke, a low fire burned near a trickling spring. The stranger sat beside it, grinding herbs and bark together in a clay bowl, humming something old and haunting. He packed the mixture onto her wound, and the fire in her leg dulled to a deep ache. Coyotes called from the ridges. Then nothing. The next dawn crept gray through the cracks of a small shelter carved into mudstone. Clara's throat was raw, her body heavy, as if the desert itself had lain upon her. The smell of wood smoke hung thick in the air. She lay on a bed of woven grass, her leg bandaged clean. The man sat cross-legged near the doorway, sharpening a knife with slow, patient strokes. For a long moment, neither spoke. When he saw her eyes open, he gave a single nod. "You live," he said quietly. She swallowed hard. "Where am I?" "In the canyon," he replied. 2 miles from where you fell. My camp. My father, she murmured. They'll find your trail, he said, glancing toward the ridge. If you're strong enough to wait. She tried to sit, but the world tilted again. He handed her a gourd of water, his movements careful, deliberate, almost respectful. Drink. She did. The water tasted like life itself. He studied her leg, his gaze calm but focused. Snake's poison runs deep, he said. You stay here 3, maybe 4 days. I can't, she began, but her voice faltered. And then she saw what he saw, a white woman alone in an Apache's shelter, helpless, vulnerable. Her heart pounded. What do you want from me? His gaze didn't move. Nothing. He turned back to the fire, feeding it quietly, as the desert wind moaned through the canyon. Her pulse thundered in her ears. What do you want from me? His gaze didn't flinch. Nothing. He turned back to the fire, feeding dry twigs into the embers. Rest. Outside, the wind whispered through the canyon, long and low like an old lament. Clara Wynter watched him move, each motion steady, purposeful, silent. He was a man who had made peace with solitude, a soul shaped by the hush of open land. The fear inside her slowly faded, replaced by a pull she didn't understand, a quiet, aching curiosity. Who was this man? Why live alone in a wilderness that felt like the end of the world? By noon he returned from the ridges with a bundle of herbs tied in buckskin. He crushed them into a paste and replaced her bandage. His touch was strong yet gentle, like someone who had healed more wounds than he'd caused. Thank you, she whispered. He gave a short nod, eyes lowered. My name is Kaelen Stormhawk. She hesitated, her voice soft. Clara. He repeated it under his breath as if tasting the sound. Clara. The slanting light painted half his face gold, tracing the lines the sun had carved there. He looked older than 30, worn by silence, marked by the wind, but there was a kindness in him buried deep beneath the stillness, the kind a man only keeps when he's known both peace and loss. As night fell, Kaelen set a clay bowl beside her, a stew of beans and prickly pear. She forced herself to eat. When she looked up again, he was sitting outside on a flat rock, facing the sky as it bled into night. Firelight flickered over his shoulders as he spoke softly in a tongue she didn't know. Melodic, reverent, like a prayer carried to the stars. The canyon gave no answer. Clara wrapped the blanket tighter, listening to the crackle of the fire, the wind sighing beyond the walls. Somewhere beneath her fear and exhaustion, something fragile began to bloom, a quiet trust she couldn't yet name. Out there in a land built on blood and silence, 2 people who should have been enemies were bound by the oldest reason in the world, the will to keep one another alive. Before sleep claimed her, she whispered his name, just to be sure it was real. Kaelen. The wind moved through the red hills, carrying her voice into the wild, endless dark. When Clara woke again, the sun had turned the canyon walls to molten copper. She had lost count of the days since the bite. Fever had come and gone like tides, leaving her weak, but more aware each morning. Kaelen worked quietly around the camp, fetching water, grinding herbs, stacking wood. Every movement followed a rhythm older than words. He spoke little. Yet she began to understand his silences, the one that meant thought, the one that meant worry, the one that meant peace. By the 3rd morning, the pain had dulled to a steady ache. She braced herself on her palms, forcing her body upright. Kaelen looked up from the fire. "Good," he said simply. "I think I'm better," she murmured, her voice hoarse. He poured steaming water into a dented tin cup and handed it to her. "Mesquite tea helps the blood." The taste was bitter and smoky. She tried to smile. "You've got a healer's touch." He shrugged, eyes on the fire. "My mother taught me before the war." Clara studied him, but he said nothing more. The phrase lingered in her mind like a locked door. The days passed in a quiet rhythm. At dawn, Kaelen vanished into the hills to hunt or gather herbs. By midday, he returned with rabbit quail or strange roots she'd never seen. Clara, still too weak to walk far, busied herself by mending his worn blanket, cleaning his tin cup with sand and water. At night, they sat by the fire. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried weight. Once, when she asked if he missed his people, he looked into the flames and said softly, "They're still here." He touched his chest. Just not the way they were. That night, she couldn't sleep. The stars hung close enough to touch, pressing against the canyon roof. She turned on her bed of woven grass, watching his shadow against the firelight. "What did you mean?" she whispered, "about your people?" He didn't answer for a long time. Then quietly, "They're gone. My brother died in the Scouts. My mother before that. I left the mountains after. I'm sorry," she breathed. He nodded slowly. "Death is part of the land, but I couldn't keep fighting for men who took it." The silence that followed seemed to hear every word left unspoken. Finally, she said, "I used to think the desert was empty." He turned toward her, the fire glinting in his eyes. "It's full," he said. "If you know how to listen." The next morning, he helped her walk to the stream. The air smelled of warm cedar. She leaned on him at first, then dared a few steps on her own, wincing but determined. "Easy," he warned quietly. Clara Wynter smiled faintly. "You sound like my father." He looked at her, curious. "He builds things," she said softly. "Railroads, tracks that cut straight through the land." Lines Kaelen Stormhawk repeated, his tone, flat, heavy. She caught the shift in his eyes too late, the hurt beneath his calm. To him, those lines meant something else, the bite of iron through sacred ground. "He believes it brings progress," she murmured, though the word felt hollow even on her tongue. Kaelen said nothing. He crouched by the stream, washing his hands in silence. "The land doesn't need progress," he said finally. "It needs respect." Clara sank to her knees beside him, fingers touching the cold current. "I didn't mean to offend you." He shook his head. "You speak what you've been taught. I speak what I've seen." They stayed that way for a long while, the sound of the stream whispering between them like a fragile peace neither dared break. That evening, Clara decided to thank him properly. From her weathered saddlebag, she pulled out her sketchbook, edges, torn pages, stained, but mostly intact. When Kaelen returned from tending the horses, she offered it to him open. On the page was a drawing of him kneeling by the fire, his head bowed, his face caught in flickering light, rough lines but tender. He studied it for a long time. "Why draw this?" he asked. "Because you saved me," she said quietly. "And because I don't want to forget your face." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, maybe even embarrassment. "You see more than what's there." "I see what you hide," she replied. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly, almost a smile. He closed the sketchbook gently and handed it back. "Keep it. The desert already remembers me." Days passed. One afternoon, thunder rolled far in the distance, though the sky was still clear. Clara stepped outside. Her legs were stronger now. The wind carried the scent of rain from the south. Kaelen stood on a rise above the canyon, motionless as a statue carved from red stone. She walked to him, the ground hot under her boots. "What do you hear?" she asked. "The wind speaks," he said without turning. "It tells when the seasons change." She tilted her head. "And what does it say now?" He hesitated, eyes narrowing at the horizon. "It says danger is coming." Her stomach tightened. "They think I'm dead by now." He shook his head. "No. They'll come, and when they do, they won't see me as a man. Only as an enemy." The words chilled her more than the wind. "But you saved my life. I'll make them understand." Kaelen gave a small shake of his head. "Words don't cross that kind of river." That night Clara couldn't sleep. The fire burned low, crackling softly as the canyon breathed around them. "If they come," she whispered, "what will you do?" Kaelen stirred the coals. The glow painted his face in red and shadow. "I don't fight anymore." "Then they'll kill you," she said, her voice trembling. He met her gaze. "If that's what the land decides, I won't run from it." Anger rose in her chest, not at him, but at the world that made such things true. "That's not fate," she said fiercely. "That's men deciding who deserves to live." His expression softened. "You have fire, Clara Wynter." She gave a shaky laugh. "Not much use out here." "Fire," he said quietly, "can still keep the dark away for a while." He added another log to the flames, and the sparks drifted upward like tiny stars. Clara lay back, her heart unsteady. She had come to this land to paint its beauty, to capture its colors. But what she'd found was something far deeper, a man carved by silence and loss, whose presence had become the only solid thing in a world she no longer understood. As sleep pulled her under, she faced a truth she hadn't dared name. She didn't fear him anymore. She feared losing him. And somewhere beyond the ridges, the wind whispered restlessly through the red hills, carrying her secret across the desert night. By the time Clara could walk without pain, the desert had changed again. The rains had passed, and a faint green shimmered along the winding arroyos. Kaelen said the land was waking. To her it still seemed vast, silent, and endless. Each morning they climbed higher into the canyon, Kaelen leading ahead, silent as shadow, the world around them reborn beneath the western sun. Silent as the breath of the desert. Kaelen Stormhawk moved ahead, his moccasins making no sound against the stone. Clara Wynter followed at a steady pace, pausing now and then to sketch the curve of a mesquite branch, the arc of a hawk gliding above, or Kaelen's tall figure framed against the burning sun. He showed her things she'd never seen before, how the sand carried the memory of the wind, how stones turned deep blue when dusk fell, and how even silence had its own heartbeat if you learned to listen. One morning, they discovered a narrow cleft hidden behind a curtain of brush. Inside, the air was cool and still, the walls painted with fading symbols, men with bows, spirals, deer, and stars. "My people painted these," Kaelen said softly. "Long ago." Clara traced her fingers near the drawings, careful not to touch. "They're beautiful." He nodded. "They tell where we came from, and where the spirits wait." She turned toward him. "Do you still believe they're here?" Kaelen met her gaze, and for the first time she saw a tenderness in his eyes that the desert hadn't burned away. "The wind speaks for them. When it moves through the stone, it's their breath. They stood there, listening, the hush between them sacred. Somewhere outside, a raven cried once and vanished into the endless sky. That afternoon, they reached a shallow stream winding through the canyon. The water glimmered between smooth stones. Clara knelt to wash the dust from her hands, then tried to cross, forgetting how slick the rocks could be. Her boots slipped. Kaelen's arm caught her before she fell. The world froze. She felt the strength in his grip, the warmth of his body so close to hers. For a single breath, neither moved. Then she stepped back quickly, face flushed, forcing a shaky laugh. "I guess I'm not made for your kind of country." He studied her for a long moment before stepping back to the bank. "No one is," he said quietly. "This land either makes you, or it breaks you." But there was something new in his voice now, a weight she couldn't name, something between warning and longing. That evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, they sat by the fire. Clara pulled out her sketchbook again. "May I draw you properly this time?" Kaelen gave a faint, amused shrug. "If you think you can." She studied him, while he sat cross-legged sharpening an arrowhead. His hair caught the last strands of light, his face carved with shadows and fire. He looked as if the canyon itself had shaped him from stone. When she showed him the finished sketch, he stared at it for a long moment. "You see too much," he murmured. Maybe she replied, "But that's what artists do." He handed the book back. Their fingers brushed rough skin against soft, warm. A brief spark passed between them, quick and alive. That night the wind rose. Clouds rolled across the moon, scattering thin silver light. Clara woke to the sound of distant thunder. Kaelen sat outside, watching the storm. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and stepped out. "Can't sleep?" she asked. He looked over. "The wind's changing. Rain's coming from the south." They watched lightning crawl along the far ridges. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Clara said softly, "You pray, sometimes, don't you, at night?" Kaelen nodded. "For those who walked before me, do you ever pray for yourself?" He gave a faint smile without warmth. "No, I don't ask for what can't be given. What's that peace?" Thunder rolled closer. Clara's voice trembled. "You carry too much alone." He looked at her, his eyes dark as storm clouds. "There's no one left to carry it with me." Something in her chest cracked at his words. She stepped closer, wind catching her hair. Then maybe there should be. He didn't move, but his expression softened. "You don't belong to this place, Clara Wynter." She smiled sadly. "I'm beginning to think I don't belong anywhere." Lightning flashed, lighting his face for a single blinding instant, quiet, scarred, heartbreakingly human. When the thunder faded, he said gently, "You should rest." But neither of them did. By morning, the air was clean and cool, washed by distant rain. Kaelen was gone. Panic twisted through her chest until she found him at the canyon's edge, kneeling beside a cluster of white flowers pushing through the wet soil. He held one carefully between his fingers. "These only bloom after a storm," he said. "They live one day, then fade." Clara smiled faintly. "That's a short life." Kaelen's gaze lingered on the fragile petals. Sometimes the shortest ones burn the brightest. He stood glancing at her leg. "You walk better now." "Thanks to you," Clara Wynter said softly. Kaelen Stormhawk shook his head. "The land heals. I only listen to what it asks." She studied him, sunlight glinting off the faint scar tracing his cheek. "Maybe the land sent you," she murmured. He said nothing, but a shadow of a smile touched his lips before fading. That evening, as they packed the last of the dried meat, Clara noticed his movements were tense. His eyes kept darting toward the northern ridge. "What is it?" she asked. "Smoke," he replied after a pause. "Riders, maybe? Your people." Her pulse quickened. "They've found us. Soon," he said quietly, glancing toward the canyon's mouth before looking back at her. "If they come, they'll think I took you. They won't listen." "I can explain," she insisted. "My father will believe me." Maybe your father Kaelen, said his voice low, but not the others. They already know what they want to believe. Clara bit her lip. "Then I'll stay hidden. Then I'll stay." He shook his head. "If they find you here, they'll hang me. If you're gone, they might let me live." She stared at him, realization sinking in like cold iron. "You're sending me away." Kaelen didn't answer, just turned toward the fire. "It's safer." Anger flared in her chest. "You saved my life. You think I'm just going to ride off and let them kill you for it?" He looked up sharply, and for the first time she saw something fierce in his eyes. Not anger, but fear. "If you stay, it'll be worse for both of us." The fire crackled between them, filling the heavy silence. Finally, she whispered, "Tell me something. If I were one of your people, if I belonged to your world, would you still send me away?" He held her gaze for a long, painful moment before answering, voice quiet as falling ash. "Yes, because I wouldn't want the world to break you." Tears stung her eyes. She turned away, brushing them back angrily. "It's already too late for that." She started toward the shelter, but Kaelen caught her wrist, his touch gentle, almost pleading. "Clara." She turned. For a heartbeat, they stood close, the air between them charged with everything unspoken. The wind swept through the canyon, lifting dust and the faint scent of coming rain. He released her hand, his voice low. "The wind says your father is near." That night, Clara lay awake, listening to the desert whisper restlessly. She could feel the peace they'd built crumbling with the dawn. She didn't see Kaelen standing in the shadows, watching her beneath the silver light, his face carved with sorrow strength, and something he hadn't yet dared name love. And as the wind rolled through the red hills, it carried a warning older than the land itself. Nothing born of two worlds ever comes easy. At dawn, the canyon fell still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The first thing Clara noticed was the faint scent of smoke drifting from the north ridge. Kaelen stood on the ledge above the camp, eyes locked on the horizon. Sunlight caught the curve of his bow slung across his shoulder. "They're coming," he said. Clara followed his gaze. Far-off thin columns of smoke rose into the pale sky campfires, maybe a dozen or more. Her stomach tightened. My father Kaelen nodded once. "And soldiers. Too many horses for settlers." Her breath came fast. "Then I'll go to them, I'll tell them the truth." Kaelen shook his head. "You think they'll listen? You're a white woman. They'll only see what they want to see." His words struck deep, because she knew he was right. "Then if I don't try," she said, her voice trembling, "they'll kill you." Kaelen studied her quietly, shadows under his eyes. "If I run, they'll hunt me. If I stay, they'll kill me. There's no path that keeps us both alive." She stepped closer. "Then we make one." They packed fast. Kaelen gathered herbs and dried food, while Clara rolled her few belongings. Her sketchbook, a tin cup, a shawl still smelling faintly of smoke and cedar. The canyon felt smaller now, the walls pressing in, as though the land itself knew what was coming. By midday, the echo of distant hooves reached them. Kaelen led her higher into the cliffs to a hollow hidden by brush and stone. From there they could see a long line of riders cutting across the flats below a flag whipping in the wind. Men rode in with broad hats and blue coats. Elias Wynter near the front. Clara Wynter's throat went dry. "They'll kill you if they find you," she whispered. Kaelen Stormhawk's jaw tightened. "If I hide, they'll say I'm guilty. If I stand, maybe they'll listen." He checked the knife at his belt and the worn Winchester slung across his back. "Kaelen, please," she begged. "Let me speak first." He looked at her, and for a brief moment something softened in his expression. "I believe you would, but the world is not kind to belief." By late afternoon, the riders reached the lower canyon. Their voices echoed up the cliffs, sharp and hollow. Clara wanted to run to them to shout the truth, but Kaelen caught her arm. "Wait until they see you alive," he said. "That will be your proof." They crouched behind the rocks as the riders approached. A shout went up when one man spotted movement on the ridge, then came the crack of a rifle. Another followed. The sound tore through the still air. Kaelen yanked Clara down. A bullet struck the stone beside her shoulder, spraying dust across her face. "Stop," she cried, stumbling into view. "Don't shoot!" Below, Elias jerked his horse to a halt. "Clara." His voice split the canyon. She ran a few paces down the slope, waving her arms. "I'm here. I'm alive." The soldiers reined in confusion, rippling through their ranks. But when her father saw the man beside her, dark-skinned, dressed in buckskin, his expression hardened. His hand moved toward his holster. "What in God's name?" he began. But Kaelen stepped forward, palms open. "She was lost," he said evenly. "Bitten by a rattler. I helped her." Elias's face tightened. "You expect me to believe that it's the truth?" Clara said, stepping between them. "He saved me. I'd be dead without him." One soldier spat into the dust. "Looks to me like she's been taken up here a while." "Enough," Clara snapped, her voice fierce. "You'll not speak that way." The tension snapped like dry brush in the fire. A single shot rang out. No one knew whose rifle fired, and Kaelen staggered back, clutching his shoulder. "Kaelen." Clara screamed. He dropped to one knee, blood darkening his sleeve. Before she could reach him, Elias grabbed her arm. "Stay back." "Let me go," she cried, twisting free. "He's bleeding." "He's a savage," Elias roared. "You don't know what he's done. I know what he hasn't." Clara's voice cracked. "He didn't leave me to die." The soldiers shifted uneasily. The wind screamed through the canyon, carrying the scent of rain and gunpowder. Clouds rolled across the sun, darkening the world. Then came a new sound, the low, rising growl of thunder. Kaelen looked up weakly. "River's coming," he said. At first, no one understood. Then they heard it, the deep building roar from within the canyon like the breath of the earth itself. "Flash flood," someone shouted. The ground shuddered beneath them. From upstream came a wall of brown water filled with branches and stone. "Ride," Elias shouted, spurring his horse, but the torrent was faster than any horse alive. Kaelen grabbed Clara's hand. Up the ridge, they climbed toward higher ground as the flood slammed into the canyon floor, tearing away tents, rifles, men. A horse screamed and vanished beneath the churning current. Clara slipped her boot, caught in a root. Kaelen turned back, pulling her free, just as the surge struck his legs. The force nearly dragged him away. Elias, waist-deep in the torrent, reached for a rock but lost his footing. Father Clara screamed. Kaelen let go of her hand and dove into the water. The current swept him downstream, but he caught Elias's coat and hauled him toward a ledge. Clara slid down after them, grabbing a branch to steady herself. She saw Kaelen push her father upward, muscles straining against the flood. Elias scrambled to safety just as another wave struck, ripping Kaelen loose and pulling him back into the roaring water. Clara didn't think she dove after him. The river swallowed her whole, cold and furious, spinning her into the dark. Then Kaelen Stormhawk's arm was around her again, pulling her toward a boulder that jutted from the rising current. They clung to it until the roar of the flood dulled to a low murmur. When at last the water slowed, they dragged themselves to the muddy bank, soaked and gasping for breath. Elias Wynter stumbled toward them, coughing hard mud streaking his clothes. Kaelen lay on his back, chest rising shallowly, blood mixing with the dirt at his shoulder. Clara Wynter fell to her knees beside him. "Stay with me," she whispered. His lips moved faintly. "Told you. The land remembers." Then his eyes fluttered closed. Kaelen. She shook him, panic cutting through her voice. Her father knelt beside her, placing a steady hand on her arm. "He's alive, girl. Faint, but alive." She pressed her hand to Kaelen's wound, tears carving clean lines through the dust on her face. "Please, don't leave me now." Thunder rolled off into the distance, softer with each echo. The rain eased to a whisper. By the time the floodwaters sank back into the earth, the canyon lay in ruin, tents, gone rifles, lost men scattered and silent. Clara sat with Kaelen's head in her lap. Her father stood nearby, staring out at what was left of his camp. After a long silence, he spoke, his voice rough, uncertain. "He saved me," he said slowly, as if the words felt strange in his mouth. Clara looked up. "He saved us both." Elias nodded once, then looked away. "We'll stay till morning. Then, we'll see." He walked off, leaving her with the quiet drip of water and Kaelen's unsteady breathing. Night came over the red hills, the air washed clean by rain. Clara held his hand as the stars rose above the canyon, her heartbeat matching the rhythm of his pulse. The world had nearly stolen him from her, but she would not let it. Not now, not ever. She bent close, her voice trembling against his ear. "If you live, I'll never leave." Beyond the cliffs, the river sighed, carrying her vow into the wild, restless night. When morning broke, the sky was pale and forgiving. Mist curled from the ground, steam rising where the sun touched soaked earth. The canyon, scarred but still standing, seemed to breathe again. Clara sat beside Kaelen. He hadn't stirred since the night before. His skin was warm but pale, the bandage at his shoulder dark with blood. Nearby, Elias and the surviving men had built a fire, drying what remained of their gear. No one spoke. Clara dipped a cloth into a tin of water, wrung it out, and pressed it gently to Kaelen's forehead. "You're safe now," she whispered, though she wasn't sure she believed it. Elias limped over his boots, torn his face marked with exhaustion. He crouched beside her. "How bad?" he asked. "He lost a lot of blood," she said softly, but his breathing steady. Elias nodded, eyes lingering on Kaelen. "He saved my life, Clara." "I know." He drew a slow breath. "I don't understand any of this, but I recognize something in him. Something decent." Clara looked up, surprised by his tone. There was no anger there, only weariness. "You don't have to understand," she said quietly. "Just let him live." He rose stiffly. "That part's not mine to decide." All afternoon, Clara worked to keep Kaelen alive. She boiled water, crushed herbs the way he'd once shown her, and changed his bandage. The wound was deep, but clean. When his eyelids fluttered, she leaned close. "Kaelen," she whispered. "It's me." He stirred, eyes glazed with fever. "Clara, I'm here." He tried to smile, wincing. "Your father alive because of you." He exhaled, eyelids heavy. Then the land was merciful. You were merciful, she said, pressing her palm over his chest. His heartbeat thudded weak but steady beneath her hand. Don't talk. Just rest. He managed a faint grin. Bossy. The sound drew a half laugh from her, tangled with tears. Somebody has to keep you in line. Outside, thunder grumbled far away, rolling toward the horizon. She fed him broth from a tin cup, coaxing each sip past his trembling lips. When he drifted back to sleep, she stayed beside him, watching the sunlight crawl down the canyon walls. By nightfall, the survivors' fire burned low. Most of the men slept. A few had ridden out to search for a way home. Clara sat alone beside Kaelen, listening to the desert reclaim its silence. She thought of how she'd once called this land cruel, empty, and how wrong she'd been. It held more grace than any church she'd ever known. She thought of Kaelen's patience, his strength, his quiet faith in things unseen. When she brushed his damp hair from his brow, his eyes opened. "You should rest," Kaelen Stormhawk whispered, his voice rough as gravel. "I can't, Clara," Wynter murmured. He tried to smile. "The storm's gone, not inside me." Kaelen's hand found hers, fingers rough and warm despite his weakness. "Don't be afraid." "I'm not," she said softly. "Not of the storm. Not of them. Not anymore." Her throat tightened. "When I thought you were gone, it felt like the desert stopped breathing." He looked at her through the flicker of firelight, his dark eyes steady. "The desert always breathes. You just have to listen." Clara leaned forward until her forehead rested against his. "Then let me breathe with it." Their lips met, gentle, hesitant, yet real. The kiss wasn't born of desire, but of gratitude, of relief, of two hearts that had nearly lost their place in the world. When she pulled back, tears blurred her vision. Kaelen reached up, brushing one away with his thumb. "No more tears," he said quietly. "The earth is wet enough." She let out a soft, trembling laugh. "You sound like an old prophet." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I am." By morning, Kaelen could stand with her help. His legs trembled, but his spirit held steady. Elias Wynter watched from a distance, his face unreadable. When he finally spoke, it was to Kaelen. "You're strong to still be standing." Kaelen straightened, pain flickering behind his eyes. "Your daughter's the strong one. She willed it so." Elias gave a short nod. "Maybe she willed us all through." He rubbed a weary hand along his jaw. "We'll leave for town at noon. The army won't be far behind once they see what the flood did." Clara glanced between them. "And him?" Her father hesitated, but Kaelen answered first, his tone even. "If I ride with you, they'll hang me for my skin before they learn my name." Elias didn't deny it. "He's right." Clara turned sharply. "Then what, you'll stay here and wait for them?" Kaelen shook his head. "I'll head south across the border. There's land there where no one asks what you are." Her heart twisted. "You'll die alone." He looked at her gently. "Better alone than in chains." Elias shifted his voice low. "The world's changing, Clara, but not fast enough." He turned to Kaelen. "If you can travel, there's an old trail through the mountains. Follows the river west, then south. It's safer than the main road." Kaelen nodded. "Thank you." Elias met his gaze, steady and grave. "You saved my daughter. I won't forget that." He hesitated. "Take what you need, food horses. I'll tell the men you went east." When he walked away, Clara felt tears threatening again. Kaelen watched him go. "He's a good man," he said softly. "When the world allows it," she replied. Then, meeting his eyes, she added, "Maybe we should stop waiting for the world's permission." They left that evening, as the sun bled behind the red hills. Elias stood by the ruined camp hat in hand, watching as they saddled 2 horses. When Clara embraced him, he held her for a long moment. "You're sure about this?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "I've never been more sure of anything." He looked past her toward Kaelen, then back. "If you find peace out there, that'll be enough for me." Clara smiled through her tears. "We'll write." He chuckled softly. "Just make sure you live long enough to send it." Then, with a final nod, he let her go. The trail south wound through canyons still slick with floodwater, the ground gleaming in the light of a new dawn. Kaelen rode slowly, his arm bound tight, his face pale from pain, but his eyes seemed freer, as if the land itself had forgiven him. By dusk, they made camp by the river. The air smelled of rain and sage. Clara built a small fire and sat beside him as the night deepened. Kaelen watched the flames, his voice quiet. "I used to dream I'd die in this land, my spirit wandering the canyons forever. But maybe death wasn't what I was meant to find here." She looked at him. "Then what?" He turned toward her, the firelight catching his eyes. "You." The word stole her breath. She reached into her satchel, pulling out the worn sketchbook that had followed her through every storm. On a blank page, she began to draw the firelight, the river, and his face turned toward her, finally at peace beneath the wild, endless sky. When she finished the drawing, Clara Wynter took up her pencil and wrote beneath it, "The Healer and the Heart." Kaelen Stormhawk leaned over her shoulder, reading the words with quiet curiosity. "What will you do with it?" "Keep it," she said. "So if the world forgets us, at least we'll remember who we were." He smiled softly, reaching out to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The wind drifted through the cottonwoods, low and tender, like a lullaby meant only for them. She leaned against him, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her cheek. The desert, once cruel and merciless, now hummed around them, alive, forgiving whole. When the sun rises, Kaelen murmured, his voice almost a prayer, "We ride for Sonora." Clara closed her eyes, her hand resting over his. Then let the sun rise. As the night deepened, they sat wrapped in firelight, the canyon walls glowing faintly as if the land itself was blessing their vow to begin again, 2 hearts reborn from the ashes of the storm, bound forever by the wild red earth of the West. Years softened the land the way time smooths a scar. Where floodwaters had once torn the canyon apart, willows now stood tall, their roots tangled deep in the rust-colored soil. The sky still burned the same fierce blue, and the wind still carried the old songs. For Clara and Kaelen, the desert was no longer a place of fear. It was home. Their house stood on a rise above the San Pedro walls of sun-baked adobe beneath a cedar-beamed roof. Smoke curled from the chimney, mingling with the sound of children's laughter from the corral where 2 horses grazed. Inside, Clara wiped the last trace of paint from her fingers and stepped back from the canvas propped near the window. The picture caught the afternoon light, gold against the canyon walls, 2 distant riders crossing a wide plain. She had painted that scene a dozen times, yet each brushstroke still felt like prayer. Kaelen entered quietly, carrying a bundle of wood. His hair was streaked with gray now, though his frame was still strong and his movements steady. He paused behind her, studying her work. "You still paint this place?" he said. Clara smiled. "Because it still speaks." He set the wood down and pressed a kiss to her temple. The land never forgets. She leaned back against him, listening to the slow, certain beat of his heart. Nor do I. Outside, a young girl's voice called bright and musical. "Mama, Papa, come see." They stepped out onto the porch. Their daughter, Kaelen Stormhawk, stood barefoot in the dirt, holding a handful of wild poppies. Behind her, their son, Kaelen Stormhawk, tugged at the reins of a stubborn mule, nearly twice his size. Clara laughed. "He'll drag you all the way to Tucson if you're not careful." Kaelen grinned, the same sharp cheekbones and spark in his eyes as his father. "Papa said I can handle him." Kaelen chuckled. "I said try to handle him." The children burst into laughter and ran toward the house. Clara watched them, warmth rising in her chest. Sometimes she still couldn't believe this peace had grown from so much pain, like wildflowers blooming through stone. Later that night, after the children had fallen asleep, Kaelen sat outside by the fire pit, whittling a piece of cedar into the shape of a bird. The air smelled of rain and wood smoke. Crickets sang softly in the brush. Clara brought out 2 mugs of coffee and sat beside him. "They'll sleep till morning," she said. "Good," he murmured. "They dream loud." She smiled. "They get that from you." He shook his head, amused. "No, from you. You dream louder." They sat in companionable silence, watching the flames shift from orange to gold. "Do you ever think about the canyon?" she asked quietly. About that day, Kaelen nodded. Sometimes in dreams. The flood, the noise, the fear, and the quiet after. But mostly he looked at her eyes, lit by the fire. "I remember you lying there in the firelight, alive." She reached for his hand, her fingers weaving through his. "It feels like another lifetime." He traced the faint scar on her leg where the snake had bitten her. Maybe it was. Maybe we died that day and this is what came after. She smiled, her eyes glimmering. "Then I'm glad we did." A week later, a traveler rode up to their homestead, a young writer from back east named Noah Pike Notebook, always open curiosity burning in his gaze. He had come seeking the story of the healer from the Red Hills, a tale whispered across towns like a desert legend. Kaelen was mending a saddle when the man arrived, dust on his boots and hunger for truth in his eyes. "Are you the one they call the Apache doctor?" the traveler asked. Kaelen looked up, expression unreadable. "I'm just a man who knows a few herbs." The stranger's eyes gleamed with curiosity. "And your wife folks say she paints the desert so real it looks alive." Clara Wynter appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. "If the land's alive," she said with a warm smile, "I just try to keep up with it." The man chuckled. "People would pay to hear how you two came to be here, how an Apache and a white woman built a home out here in the borderlands. It's a rare thing." Kaelen Stormhawk's gaze hardened. "Not as rare as kindness." The traveler flushed, but didn't retreat. "Still, it's a story worth telling. The world could use a little hope." Clara's eyes softened. She looked at Kaelen, then back at the stranger. "Hope," she said quietly, "doesn't live in stories. It lives in what people choose to remember." The man hesitated, then nodded respectfully. "Then may I remember this place?" Kaelen studied him for a long moment. "If you remember it true." That night after the traveler had ridden on, Clara stood by the window watching the stars burn cold and bright over the black hills. The moon hung low, painting the winding river in silver. Kaelen came up behind her, his arm slipping around her waist. Thinking again. Always. "He'll tell our story, you know. Maybe not exactly how it happened, but close enough." Kaelen's voice was calm. "Let him. The land will tell the rest." Clara turned to him, half smiling. "You still trust the wind more than people." "The wind never lies," he said, brushing his thumb along her cheek. They stood there for a long time, the silence between them thick with everything they'd survived. Finally, Clara asked softly, "Do you ever miss it?" The old life. Kaelen's eyes drifted to the horizon. "Sometimes I miss the faces," he said. "Not the anger." He paused. I miss my mother's garden," she whispered, the sound of rain on a tin roof. "But I wouldn't trade this for any of it." He kissed her forehead. "Then we've both come home." The next morning, the children played near the stream, while Clara painted beneath the shade of a cottonwood tree. Her brush moved slowly, each stroke patient and sure. On the canvas, the river glimmered beneath a golden sky. Two figures stood together in the fading light side by side. When she was finished, she signed the bottom corner carefully. C. Wynter. Sonora, 1892. Kaelen approached, wiping his hands on a rag. "You've painted us again." "Not us," she said with a small smile. "Just what the land remembers." He tilted his head, studying it. "And what does it remember?" She looked toward the hills glowing under the noonday sun. "That love can outlast the storm." He said nothing, only reached for her hand. The children's laughter drifted across the yard, bright and free. Far off, the wind swept through the canyons, whispering over stone and grass, over the resting places of those who'd come and gone. It carried the scent of mesquite and rain, and if one listened closely, the echo of a promise made long ago beside a dying fire. As afternoon melted into amber and rose, Kaelen wrapped his arm around Clara's shoulders. "Do you hear it?" he asked. She smiled softly. "The wind." "No," he said. "The land. It remembers us." Clara leaned against him, eyes glistening. "Then let it remember us kindly." And as the sun slipped behind the red hills of Sonora, two souls once lost stood in peace. The desert seemed to breathe with them, vast and eternal, carrying their love through time like a whisper of wind across stone, gentle, steadfast, and forever. And when the last words fade, thank you for listening and for letting this story find a home in your heart.